Ever get that feeling, like someone's messing with your mind? And I'm not talking like full-on tinfoil hat conspiracy theories or anything, but those little ways we get nudged to think a certain way, persuaded, or even, tricked. It's kind of freaky when you think about it. Like just the other day, Instagram, right, serving me up this ad. And it was for like gourmet dog treats, organic, gluten-free, the whole 9 yards. And I swear it knew exactly what I was like craving at that moment. I was all, oh my gosh, my Chihuahua needs these. But let's be real, he'd be just as happy with like a stale cracker. So clearly something was up, right? Some clever marketing was messing with my mind. And it got me thinking, how much of what we think, what we believe, is actually shaped by stuff outside ourselves? Kind of wild to think about, right? You say a little digging. Turns out there's this whole spectrum of like mind control techniques out there. Some are, thankfully, pretty rare. Like the intense brainwashing you see in, cults or hostage situations. The classic image of a prisoner being broken down.
Yeah.
And then reprogrammed.
Yeah.
So scary stuff. Their whole identity, their beliefs, everything they thought they knew, just like shattered and then rebuilt to serve someone else's agenda. Thankfully, that level of intense, systematic brainwashing is pretty uncommon in everyday life. But it does raise some questions, right? Like, how vulnerable are we to manipulation, even if it's not that extreme? Like, think about Patty Hearst, kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army back in the 70s, ended up joining them, even robbed a bank. Her lawyers argued she'd been brainwashed. Crazy, right? And then there's the case of Lee Boyd Malvo, one of the DC snipers. The defense claimed he was under the influence of the older sniper, John Allen Muhammad. Now, neither of those defenses actually worked in court. Juries tend to be pretty skeptical about the whole brainwashing made me do it thing. But still, these cases make you wonder about the limits of free will, Like, how much control do we really have over our own thoughts and actions? It's a bit of a mind bender, right? Okay, so maybe full-blown brainwashing is rare, but what about hypnosis? We've all seen those cheesy stage shows where people cluck like chickens, right? But therapeutic hypnosis is a whole different ballgame. It's actually used for things like pain management, anxiety, even helping people quit smoking. And here's where it gets really interesting. Research shows that the people who are most susceptible to hypnosis, the ones who really go under, tend to fall into two categories. You have the fantasizers. These are the folks who can, like, totally lose themselves in their imaginations. And then you have the dissociators, people who are good at mentally checking out. Think folks with a history of trauma, for example. So what does that tell us about how our minds work, how we process information, or even block it out? It's kind of wild to think about. All right, let's move on to manipulation. The sneaky sibling of mind control. Let's be real, we've all encountered this. Maybe even done it ourselves, right? It's that underhanded stuff people do to get what they want. Pushing those guilt buttons. Playing the victim, you know the drill. One of the most insidious tactics is what's called crazy making. It's where they twist things around, gaslight you, make you doubt your own sanity. Like you're all, wait, am I the one being unreasonable here? It's crazy making, literally. Then there's creating an illusion. This was where they build this whole fake persona to gain your trust. They're charming, they're helpful, they seem like your best friend, but it's all an act designed to get you to lower your guard so they can, manipulate you. Speaking of influence, let's talk about persuasion. This one's everywhere, right? Advertising, political campaigns, even just try and convince your roommate to do the dishes. We're constantly bombarded with messages trying to change our minds. But here's the key difference between persuasion and the other stuff we've talked about. Persuasion, at least in theory, allows for free will. You ultimately choose whether to accept or reject the message. But here's the thing. Those persuasive messages are often crafted using some seriously powerful psychological tools. There's this guy, Robert Cialdini. He wrote this book called Influence, and he lays out 6 weapons of influence. Techniques that are used to, subtly nudge us towards saying yes. Things like reciprocity, social proof, liking, authority, scarcity. We encounter these all the time. For example, think about reciprocity. This is the idea that we feel obligated to return favors. So if a company gives you a free sample, you're more likely to buy something from them later. It's like they've done you a favor, and now you owe them. Pretty clever, right? Or take social proof. We're more likely to do something if we see other people doing it. It's like that herd mentality. So if an ad shows a bunch of happy people using a product, you're more likely to think, hey, maybe I should try that too. It's all about tapping into that sense of belonging and social validation. And then there's liking. We're more easily persuaded by people we like, right? It's just human nature. So companies use celebrity endorsements, or they try to create ads that are relatable and make us feel good. It's all about building that connection, that sense of trust. Finally, let's talk about deception. This one's the most straightforward, but also the most damaging. It's about spreading falsehoods or half-truths to, well, deceive. Deception hurts most in relationships, obviously, because it destroys trust. But it also happens in research. Like, remember those psychology experiments where they intentionally mislead participants to see how they react? It's all in the name of science, but it does make you wonder about the ethics of it all. Here's a fascinating fact, though. Deception research suggests there's no foolproof way to tell if someone's lying just by their body language. I mean, some people are just naturally fidgety, right? Or maybe they avoid eye contact because they're shy, not because they're lying. And this is where it gets really philosophical. You ready for this? Some thinkers argue that all alien knowledge could be wrong because, well, we can be deceived. Think about that. It's like, whoa, how do we know anything for sure? It's kind of trippy, right? Okay, so we've talked about brainwashing, in this really dramatic, almost cinematic way. But let's break it down a bit, get a little more granular with how this whole process supposedly works. Experts who've studied, cults and totalitarian regimes, they say there are typically three main stages to brainwashing. First, you got to break down the person's existing identity, their sense of self. Then you offer them a new, seemingly better way of being, a path to salvation, if you will. And finally, you rebuild their identity based on this new ideology.
It's like a total transformation. That first stage, the breaking down part, it's all about shattering their worldview. Imagine being bombarded with criticism, guilt trips, told that everything you believe is wrong. Your family and friends are holding you back. It's heavy stuff. And isolation is key here. They need to cut you off from any outside support. So you become completely dependent on the brainwasher, the group, the ideology. It's like we're creating this vacuum. And then they fill it with their own stuff. Then comes the salvation stage. Now that you're feeling lost and broken, they offer you a way out. Their way, of course. This new belief system. It's presented as the answer to all your problems, the path to happiness, belonging, enlightenment, whatever it may be. And when you're vulnerable, desperate for relief, this shiny new identity can be incredibly tempting. It's like, okay, I'll try anything at this point. The final stage, rebuilding the self. It's all about, rebuilding you in their image. They reinforce these new beliefs through rituals, ceremonies, constant repetition of their dogma. They control the information you're exposed to, the people you interact with. It's like a total control environment. And here's the kicker. They want you to believe it's your choice, that you came to these new conclusions on your own. That's what makes it so effective, so insidious. Now, most experts agree that this kind of extreme brainwashing is really difficult to pull off. It requires specific conditions, isolation, control over basic needs, a charismatic leader. And even then, it might not work in the long run. People are resilient. They find ways to resist, to hold on to their own sense of self. But even those little everyday examples of brainwashing we talked about earlier, the targeted ads, the peer pressure, the subtle ways we're influenced by our social circles, they show how powerful these techniques can be, even when they're not as dramatic or overt as a cult scenario. So let's bring it back down to earth a bit and talk about those everyday mind control techniques, the manipulation, the persuasion, the deception we encounter all the time. Manipulation, as we said, is all about using underhanded tactics to get your way. And let's be honest, some people are masters at it. They're experts at playing the victim. Pushing those guilt and sympathy buttons, even making you question your own sanity. It's like they're playing chess with your emotions. But here's the thing.
Manipulators often operate from a place of insecurity and fear. They might have learned these tactics as a way to cope with difficult situations, to gain control in a world that feels chaotic and unpredictable. So it's kind of sad, you know? Now, persuasion, on the other hand, can be used for good or bad. Think about a doctor persuading a patient to quit smoking, or a teacher inspiring students to pursue their passions. Those are positive examples of persuasion, right? It's about influencing someone's choices by appealing to their reason, their emotions, their values. But persuasion can also be used to sell us things we don't need, to get us to vote against our own interests, to support causes that are harmful. The key is to be aware of the techniques being used, to critically evaluate the message, and to make our own informed decisions. One of the things that makes persuasion so effective is that it often works on a subconscious level. We might not even realize we're being influenced by clever wording, appealing images, or the perceived authority of the person delivering the message. Think about those commercials with doctors endorsing products. They're playing on that whole authority thing, right? We tend to trust doctors. So if a doctor says a product is good, we're more likely to believe them. It's subtle, but it works. Okay, let's talk about deception. Straight up lying or omitting the truth. This one's the most damaging in relationships because it destroys trust. But it's also surprisingly common in other areas of life. Think about advertising. How many times have we seen ads that exaggerate the benefits of a product or downplay its risks? Or what about politics? Politicians often spin the truth, make promises they can't keep, and use deceptive language to manipulate voters. It's like a whole industry built on deception. And then there's the whole world of online scams and fake news. It's easier than ever to spread misinformation and deceive people, especially with the rise of social media. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so how do I spot deception? How do I know who to trust? And that's a great question. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. Contrary to what you see on TV, there's no single foolproof way to detect deception just by looking at someone's body language. Some nonverbal cues, like fidgeting or avoiding eye contact, might be associated with deception, but they can also be signs of nervousness, shyness, or discomfort. So you can't just rely on those cues. Instead, experts suggest paying attention to what people say and how they say it. Liars often use vague language, repeat words and phrases, and give inconsistent or contradictory accounts. They might also hesitate before answering questions or try to change the subject. But even if you're a master at spotting those verbal cues, there's still no guarantee you'll be able to catch every liar. Some people are just really good at lying, and they can do it without breaking a sweat. So what's the takeaway here? It's not about becoming a human lie detector. It's about being aware of the possibility of deception, being cautious about who you trust, and trusting your gut if something feels off, if someone's story doesn't add up, if their actions don't match their words. If something just feels wrong, don't ignore those red flags. All right, so remember those 5 types of deception we talked about: falsification, exaggeration, omission, equivocation, and concealment. Let's break those down a bit more, get into the nitty-gritty. Falsification, well, that's your classic straight up lie, no beating around the bush, just a bold-faced untruth. Then there's exaggeration. It's like stretching the truth, making a story sound way more dramatic or impressive than it actually is. Omission, well, that's where they leave out crucial details to paint a misleading picture, make you think something that's not entirely true. Sneaky, right? Then there's equivocation. Oh, this one's a real tricky one. It's all about being vague, ambiguous, avoiding direct answers, never taking a clear stance. You're left kind of wondering, like, what do they really mean? It's like they're talking in circles, you know what I mean? And lastly, we have concealment. This is where they're actively hiding information, keeping it under wraps, like a cover-up operation, top secret, Now let's think about the motives behind all this deception. Sometimes it's all about self-preservation. They're trying to avoid trouble, protect their reputation, dodge a sticky situation,
Like that time I told my mom I finished my homework when I hadn't even started it. Not my proudest moment. Teenage me wasn't exactly known for his honesty, but hey, we all make mistakes, right? Other times, deception might be about protecting someone else, sparing their feelings, maybe, shielding them from harm, keeping a promise. Like, say, a friend tells you something super personal, and you swear you won't tell a soul. You might have to, uh, bend the truth a little if someone else starts digging for information. But let's be real, sometimes deception is just plain selfish. They're trying to gain an advantage, manipulate a situation, get what they want, no matter the cost. Think about those scam artists. Prey on vulnerable people. That's deception at its worst, right? So here's the million-dollar question. How do you spot deception? It's way harder than those crime shows make it seem, where they're like, you're scratching his nose, must be lying, and not quite that simple. Experts say there's no single foolproof way to tell if someone's lying just by their body language. Fidgeting could just be nervous. Avoiding eye contact, maybe they're shy. Who knows, right?
So instead of focusing on those iffy nonverbal cues, you got to listen carefully to what they're saying and how they're saying it. Liars often use vague language, repeat phrases, and tell inconsistent stories. They might hesitate before answering or try to change the subject. Those are red flags. But here's the catch. Even if you're a master at spotting those verbal tells, some people are just really good liars. They can weave a tale so convincingly you'd swear it was the gospel truth. So what's the takeaway here? It's not about becoming a human lie detector. It's about being aware, being cautious, trusting your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. It's about recognizing those patterns of deception, the camouflage, the disguise, the simulation, so you can protect yourself from those who might try to, pull the wool over your eyes. Well, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of mind control. From brainwashing to deception, we've covered a lot of ground. But here's the key takeaway. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about these techniques, how they work, the motives behind them, the ways to spot them, the better equipped we are to navigate the world with a critical eye and a healthy dose of skepticism. So, the next time you encounter a persuasive message, a pushy salesperson, or just a gut feeling that something's not quite right, remember what we talked about today. Trust your instincts, ask questions, and don't be afraid to say no. And hey, maybe even use some of this newfound knowledge for good, Become a master persuader yourself. Convince your friends to finally try that new restaurant. Rally your coworkers around a brilliant idea, or even just inspire someone to make a positive change in their life. The power of influence is a double-edged sword, but in the right hands, it could be a force for good. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay in control of your own mind. You got this.